I moved into the building in late October after my lease ended unexpectedly. It was an older mid-rise with 12 units, all rentals, the kind of place where nothing had been renovated recently but everything still worked. The listing mentioned shared maintenance access, which I understood to mean the superintendent could enter units for repairs with notice. That seemed standard. On my first morning there, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. It said maintenance had completed a routine inspection of the water shutoff in my unit at 9 to 10 a.m. I was standing in the kitchen at 9 to 10 a.m., making coffee. No one had knocked. I assumed the note had been left for the previous tenant and hadn't been removed. I threw it away and went to work. The building ran on a predictable rhythm. Trash on Mondays and Thursdays, quiet hours after 10. The superintendent, Lewis, came by once a week, usually Wednesdays, to check common areas. He was in his 50s, soft-spoken, and kept a clipboard with carbon copy forms. When I asked him about the note a few days later, he checked his records and said inspections were done unit by unit when tenants moved out, not in. He said maybe it was a mistake. I accepted that. My unit had two entrances, the main door from the hallway and a secondary door in the kitchen that opened into a narrow service corridor shared with the adjacent apartment. The corridor led to a locked stairwell and a small maintenance closet. Lewis told me the corridor was for plumbing access and emergency egress only. Tenants weren't supposed to use it, but it wasn't sealed off either. The lock on my kitchen door worked fine, so I didn't think about it much. About a week after I moved in, I noticed the kitchen door was unlocked when I got home. I was sure I had locked it that morning because I had checked both doors before leaving. Nothing was missing. The apartment looked the same. I told myself I had misremembered. I locked it again. 2 days later, the same thing happened. This time I checked the hinges and the frame. No damage. The lock wasn't loose. I tested it several times. It engaged properly. I considered whether Lewis might have needed access for a repair, but there was no notice posted and nothing had been worked on. I started locking the kitchen door and then placing a small piece of folded paper between the door and the frame, the way people do in hotels. It was an old habit. When I got home that evening, the paper was on the floor. I stood there longer than I needed to, looking at it. I checked the hallway door. It was locked. The windows were shut. I walked through the apartment slowly, opening closets and cabinets. Everything was in place. I emailed the property management company to ask about maintenance access. They replied the next day with a generic message explaining that the building used shared service corridors for plumbing and electrical work, and that maintenance staff might enter units without prior notice in urgent situations. They suggested contacting the superintendent if I had concerns. I didn't follow up immediately. Instead, I began to notice small changes that were easy to dismiss. A chair slightly out of alignment with the table, the dish rack rearranged, the thermostat set 1 degree lower than I remembered. These were things that could happen without anyone else being involved. I live alone, but routines blur. One morning, I found the bathroom light on. I was certain I had turned it off before bed. I checked the bulb, thinking maybe it flickered and I had left it on earlier. That night, I turned it off deliberately and stood there for a moment, watching the dark settle in. In the morning, it was on again. I wrote it down in a notebook I keep for work tasks. Just a line, bathroom light on. The building had a maintenance log posted in the lobby, a clipboard with a sheet for each month. It listed dates, unit numbers, and brief notes. I hadn't paid attention to it before, but now I started glancing at it when I came and went. My unit number appeared more often than I expected. Minor things: checked pressure, valve access, routine. The dates didn't always line up with my memory. One entry listed access at 7:45 a.m. on a Saturday when I had slept in and worked from home. I was awake at that time. No one had knocked. The kitchen door had been locked. I asked Lewis about it the next time I saw him. He looked at the sheet and frowned. He said the entries were probably pre-filled when inspections were scheduled and then checked off later. He said sometimes the times were estimates. He said not to worry about it. His answers were calm and unremarkable. That was part of the problem. There was nothing to push against. I installed a cheap battery-powered camera in the kitchen, angled toward the service door. It wasn't connected to the internet. It just recorded to an SD card when it detected motion. I didn't tell anyone about it. For 3 days, nothing happened. The footage showed me coming and going, cooking, cleaning. On the fourth day, I came home and found the camera tilted slightly downward. I reviewed the footage. At 2:17 p.m., while I was at work, the kitchen door opened. The angle wasn't wide enough to show who was there. I could see the door move, then a shadow pass across the floor. The camera registered motion for about 30 seconds. Then the door closed. There was no audio. The next clip showed me returning home at 6:03 p.m. I watched the clip several times. The timestamp was clear. The door had been locked when I left. The paper marker I had placed was gone. I took the camera down and put it in a drawer. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the footage in my head, trying to remember if I had given anyone permission to enter, if there was any reason maintenance would need access without notice. The email from management echoed in my mind. Urgent situations. The next morning, I noticed something else. The maintenance log in the lobby had a new entry for my unit, dated the previous day at 2:15 p.m. The note read, "Accessed corridor valve." I took a photo of it with my phone. I emailed management again, attaching the photo and asking for clarification. I asked who had accessed my unit and why. The reply came later that afternoon. It said the work had been authorized due to a reported pressure imbalance in the building. It said access was gained through shared infrastructure and that no personal spaces were disturbed. I replied that my kitchen was a personal space. They didn't respond. I started locking the kitchen door and then blocking it with a chair wedged under the handle. It wasn't elegant, but it made me feel better. For a few days, nothing changed. Then one evening, I came home and found the chair moved aside. The door was unlocked. I stood in the hallway for a long time before going in. Inside, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet, I thought, but that was just nerves. I checked the camera drawer. The camera was still there. I put it back up, this time higher, and angled it wider. The next recording showed the door opening again, this time at 3:02 a.m. The figure that entered stayed mostly out of frame. I could see an arm, a sleeve, a hand on the counter. The person didn't turn on the light. They moved with familiarity. They opened the cabinet under the sink, paused, then closed it. Before leaving, the hand reached up and adjusted the camera slightly, tilting it away from the door. I watched the clip once and then stopped. The following day, I went to the management office in person. It was a small space on the ground floor of a different building. I showed them the footage. The woman at the desk watched without expression. She said she would escalate it. 2 days later, I received a formal letter stating that maintenance access protocols had been reviewed and that no irregularities were found. It suggested that if I felt unsafe, I could request a transfer to another unit when one became available. I asked Lewis if he had been in my apartment at night. He looked genuinely confused. He said he didn't work nights. He said only emergency contractors had after-hours access and only to common areas. I asked him who had keys to the service corridor. He hesitated before answering. He said more people than he liked. I stopped using the kitchen door entirely. I sealed it with removable brackets and documented everything. I kept the camera running, though it was often moved or disabled. Sometimes it recorded nothing at all for hours, even when I knew I had been moving around. The maintenance log continued to show entries for my unit. Even after I told management I did not consent to access except in emergencies. The times varied. The notes stayed vague. Eventually, I moved out. I gave notice early and paid the penalty. On my last day, I removed the brackets and cleaned the apartment. As I was leaving, I checked the maintenance log one last time. There was an entry dated for the following week. My unit number was listed. The note read, "Post-occupancy check." I told myself it was just paperwork, a habit, a formality. I still think about the service corridor sometimes, about how it ran unseen behind the walls, connecting spaces that were supposed to be separate. I don't live in buildings like that anymore. When I tour apartments now, I ask about access points and logs and keys. Most people don't understand why. The system is still there. The building is still occupied. The log is probably still being filled out, times estimated, notes abbreviated. Whatever was happening didn't end when I left. It just no longer involved me directly. At least not in a way I can prove.